Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Wolpe, thank you for your gracious welcome. Thank you for the love and care you extend to my family, to this entire community. Thank you for the graciousness of spirit of offering your pulpit this Shabbat. To Cantor Feldman, to Rabbi Rodenberg, Shabbat Shalom to you, and to the entire community of Sinai Temple, Shabbat Shalom Alan. Wow! If I had your skills, your poise, if I looked as good as you do in a suit, the world is yours. Well done. Mazal tov to the entire family. You know, of all of the possible memories to retrieve at this moment, the one that strikes me as the most relevant is my memory of the Cosgrove Shabbat table. The sound of our front door opening and closing shut, signaling the arrival of my father from work, the beginning of Shabbat, and that our presence without delay was expected at the dining room table. My mother would light the Shabbat candles, Shalom Aleichem would be sung, my father would bless the four boys, my mother, and the wine. Before Hamotzi, we washed hands, Netilat Yadayim, in silence, except, of course, for the yelp-inducing flicking of the hand towel on exposed skin, an act of fraternal aggression matched only by the scrum that would ensue over the prized middle piece of challah. No matter the season, guests or no guests, dinner late or early, the sequence of what came next never changed. Nobody could eat until mention was made of the weekly Torah portion. When we were little, it could have been as brief as a check-in on our Hebrew reading skills, but as we grew to be teenagers, our discussions grew to be more robust, to include a range of medieval and contemporary commentaries. No parsha, no chicken soup. A childhood tradition that no doubt explains my Pavlovian relationship to Torah. As the discussion wound down, my father would pose the following question. So, who thinks they know what the rabbi will talk about in shul tomorrow? Would it be some aspect of the Torah reading, politics, the news out of Israel, or otherwise? Everyone had a guess. Shabbat morning arrived, we walked to shul, the Cosgrove family sitting exactly where they sit today, and the rabbi would begin his sermon. Looks were passed, an eyebrow raised, victory declared by way of a silent fist pump or an elbow to the ribs. Ben, Danny, Jason, my mother, or more often than not my father, had gotten it right, predicted the sermon topic, securing bragging rights until the cycle began once again the following week. Dad, Mazel Tov on your second Bar Mitzvah, happy 83rd birthday. Unlike the last time I spoke on this bima at my Bar Mitzvah when you wrote my speech, today you have no idea what it is I'm going to talk about. All of us, I imagine, if given the opportunity, can retrieve a memory from our youth, the childhood experiences, one-off or ongoing, that serve to shape who we are today. It could be a melody that reminds us of a certain place we once lived or a relationship we were once in. It could be the Proustian smell or taste of food, which, when stumbled upon, prompts memories to burst forth. These memories make us who we are, and they connect us to others who share the same associations. The thrill I experience watching the Dodgers take the field at Shabbos Ravine is not mine alone. It's a thrill I share with many others. Or maybe it's the books we read. The other day, my son came home from school with a copy of Catcher in the Rye in hand, a book I had to read when I was his age, an intergenerational conversation and connection by way of literature. Shared rituals, shared stories, shared memories, the ties that bind communities passed down from one generation to the next. For me, to stand here at Sinai is a literal statement. I step into this sanctuary and the floodgates of memory open up. I know that the choices I have made, the life I have built, the profession I have chosen can be traced back to Sinai. My love of the Jewish people, of Torah, of a good sermon, of beautiful music, these are present-day commitments seated in this room at my parents' Shabbat table long ago. But what for me is literal, a Jewish identity rooted in Sinai, is, according to tradition, the shared calling card for all Jews, no matter how or where we grew up. To stand at Sinai means that the events of this week's Torah reading, the receiving of Torah, the covenantal bond of our people, wasn't just something that happened in any one parsha, at any one time, or any one place. To stand at Sinai means that you believe you heard God's voice, and you perceive yourself, whether born a Jew or a convert, to be a stakeholder in that ongoing event of revelation and Jewish identity formation. No different than the Passover Seder calls on us to affirm that we see ourselves as if we left Egypt. To be a Jew means that you see yourself as if you were standing at Sinai. But mystical as the theology may be, it's not magic. Becoming a stakeholder at Sinai happens by way of a process of transmission from one generation to the next. The holidays we celebrate, the rituals we observe, the foods we eat, the books we read, the tablecloths we use, the melodies we sing, yes, these are, as a rabbi said, mitzvot, commandments, but they're also vessels of transmission by which Jewish identity is passed on. As taught in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to the elders, and so on and so forth, the chain of tradition, the strands of Jewish DNA that date back to Sinai. When done successfully, what sociologists call the mimetic transmission of Jewish practice, traditions are passed down one generation to the next. These vessels of identity are transformed from heirlooms of the past to trophies of the present. When unsuccessful, when one generation finds itself unable, unwilling, or ill-equipped to take hold of the inheritance of prior generations, when one generation cannot, as it were, hear the voice of those who came before, the vessels are rendered hollow and brittle. A rupture occurs and the chain of tradition severed. For all of the drama of this week's scene at Mount Sinai, like Elan, I think that the most intriguing exchange of the Torah reading is actually the one that comes moments before the arrival of Moses' father-in-law Jethro, who, having heard the news of the Exodus, pays a visit to his daughter, his son-in-law, and grandchildren. It was the 11th century commentator Rashi who picks up on the psychological dimensions of Jethro's arrival by noting the ecstatic manner by which Moses greets his father-in-law, bowing down, kissing him, an enthusiasm that wasn't lost on all of those present. Jethro was as close to a father as Moses ever got. Lest we forget, the Torah offers no indication that Moses had any relationship with his biological father Amram, perhaps why Moses greeted Jethro as warmly as he did. In fact, a few weeks ago, when Moses stood at the burning bush, the Midrash explains that God had to decide what voice to adopt. Too loud, and Moses may be frightened. Too soft, and Moses might not listen. So God adopts the voice of Amram, Moses' father, to speak to him. The most formidable obstacle that Moses faced wasn't his stammering tongue. It was his lack of connection to a father figure. Or to put it another way, his inability to find his own voice, a result of his not knowing the sound of his father's voice. It certainly would explain why, in the wake of the golden calf a few weeks from now, Moses pleads to see God's face. the face linked to the voice of his father, the self-doubt and insecurity that would characterize Moses' ministry, a reflection of his lifelong quest to hear his father's voice and to see his father's face. There is such rich rabbinic debate as to why or whether Jethro visited Moses before Mount Sinai. But perhaps the best answer is the most simple. How could it be otherwise? Before Moses could receive the law, his brokenness, his need for intergenerational connection had to be addressed. I serve as rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue, what people in this room refer to as the Sinai Temple of the East Coast. My rabbinate runs parallel to that of your rabbi, my dear colleague, Rabbi Wolpe. We share a lot of congregants, some of whom are here. We visit the Pope together, and it's one of the great blessings of my life that when faced with tough decisions, I do not just ask myself, what would Rabbi Wolpe do? I text or call my friend for advice. But beyond our friendship, beyond the fact that we share our pulpits with the two best cantors in America, is that we and the institutions we serve are both committed to the project of retrieving for this generation the voice of the prior generation, of rebuilding the severed link between the two. An American Jewry desperately seeking to stand at Sinai, but not quite sure how to get there. The shared experience of my brothers and me at our Shabbat table is not the shared experience of American Jewry. Most American Jews don't get to hear their father actually chant the 10 Commandments as I did this morning. How did we get where we are? It could be the rupture wrought by the Holocaust, or the challenges of reconstituting an immigrant Jewish community in a new land. It could be the failures of Jewish education, or the skyrocketing costs that keep it out of reach of so many. It could just be the challenge of living in an open society, that 70% of non-Orthodox American Jews will marry someone not born of the Jewish faith, that you can do everything right, and there's still no promise as to who your child will sit next to in freshman English. The fault could lie with the past, it could lie with the present. There's no shortage of explanations as to how we got here, no lack of finger-pointing as to who is to blame. But far more constructive than complaining and blaming is asking what to do now. This is a project which my synagogue, your synagogue, and all self-respecting synagogues are committed. How to inspire, enable, and empower an alienated American Jewry to lay claim to their rightful inheritance, to hear the voice of their fathers, and to stand proudly at Sinai. And the synagogue cannot do it alone. Our children are but reflections of the homes in which they grow up. You can stand on your soapbox and tell your kids to eat healthy, to be kind, and to live Jewishly. But your kids, they see you snacking late at night. They experience firsthand if you forgive freely. And they know better than anyone if you truly live Jewishly. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool your kids for 18 years. There are no promises in this world, but if you want your children and grandchildren to live Jewishly, it's you, not the rabbi or cantor, who will make the biggest difference. I, for one, know that if the Judaism of my home can lay claim to being traditional and enlightened, reverential and warm, aspirational and humane, proud but not parochial, I need look no further than my parents' table to see how it happened. And on a day like today, it strikes me as both accurate and appropriate to reflect that if these qualities are also the qualities that infuse the community that I lead, then they are qualities to be credited to the man who modeled them for me, my dad. Of all the possible expressions of the fifth commandment, Kaved et avicha v'et imecha, honor thy father and mother, perhaps the most obvious is the degree to which we render the values of our parents evident, even when, perhaps especially when, they are not present. Years ago, when I lived in Chicago, I recall one Shabbat walking to synagogue with my daughter, then 5 years old and now on her way to college. As we walked hand in hand, I turned to her and I said, "You know what, Lucy? Here we are, walking to shul together, hand in hand. When I was a little boy, I walked to shul holding my daddy's, your grandpa's hand. And you know what's even more fascinating? When Grandpa was a little boy, he walked to shul holding his daddy's hand." And on I went, confident that she had lost both track and interest in what I found to be so fascinating, until the moment she paused, tugged at my hand, and responded with a question as pure as it was unexpected. She looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, did Moses walk to shul with his children?" And I answered her the only way I know. "Yes, Lucy, Moses walked to shul with his children." The path ahead is not an easy one. Challenges abound. The terrain is shifting and the roadmap not always clear. Let's at least commit to doing the one thing we can all do. Let's reach out our hands to the coming generation with the hope that they'll extend their hand in return. Let's lead by example, spending more time showing and less time telling, step by step, hand in hand, generation to generation, until we are all standing together at Sinai. Shabbat Shalom.